But anyway, tonight we're going to be in James chapter 1. James chapter 1. And specifically, we're going to be looking at verses 13 through 18, where James talks about temptation. I want to begin by telling you that temptation is all around us. You may not always see it, but it's there. And if you don't believe me, just go to the shopping malls and look at everybody out there getting tempted to buy this and that and everything else. There's stuff everywhere. And, if you had younger kids, you maybe remember the Cabbage Patch craze, and you couldn't find them anywhere, and everybody was freaking out because they couldn't find these Cabbage Patch dolls. What about the Beanie Baby? We were in the middle of that one. I don't know how much we bought on that, and I think Haley took a suitcase to Mexico and gave it away one time for something. But, there's probably another thing going on right now, who knows, that's some kind of craze going on, and you've got commercials about it, and everywhere you go, there's a temptation there. But you notice that on temptations, they're not only right up in your face, they can also be kind of sneaky as well. And when I was thinking about that, that reminded me of when I was in college. I took a marketing class, and one of our assignments was to go find some subliminal messages. Anybody else ever done that? You know what a subliminal message is? Now, there's a video that got kind of popular on the internet several years ago about count how many times they bounced this basketball. And you're counting and watching, and then they get to the done, and they said, did you get 40? Or whatever the number was. And there was a bear that walked across the middle of the screen you didn't see. Anybody ever seen that one? A gorilla? Yeah. And it walks across, and you're like, I didn't even see it, because you were counting the basketballs. But anyway, there's some things that come on like that, and so I brought a couple up. So anybody ever seen this one? Tostitos. Notice the two people in the middle holding a chip over a thing of salsa? See that right there? Subliminal message. What about Amazon? You got that little line underneath, which for them, it means we sell everything from A to Z, but it also looks a little bit like a smile, doesn't it? So you'll be happy if you go buy from Amazon. What about Baskin-Robbins? See the 31 in there for their 31 flavors? So it's not just BR, it's Baskin-Robbins. 31 flavors. What about FedEx? In the arrow in FedEx means we're always moving forward. What about Toblerone? You see the bear? Yeah, see, there's a bear right there in that mountainside. What about this one? 99 cents KFC snacker. You probably can't see it from where you are, but there is a dollar sign right there in the middle. There's a dollar bill right there in the lettuce. Dollar bill, subliminal, to let you think it's inexpensive. But the point is temptation can be that same way sometimes. It can be out there and you not see it, and you not notice it until all of a sudden it's on you. And that's kind of the things around there. So we got these different things that you can kind of look out here, and you can find a bunch more. And, when I took the class, there were some people that found some crazy stuff. And it's like, no. And I'm not even going to talk about the Disney movies. If you haven't seen anything on that, that's just ridiculous. But anyway, there's that. But, you may have seen some of these, maybe not. But, when you look at these examples of that aren't necessarily temptations here, Satan can hide his temptations anywhere and everywhere. And we may not even initially recognize that sin is trying to creep in. Now, one of the chief characteristics of sin is a tendency to pass blame. So the first question you have on your list is, what are some creative excuses you have heard people give for doing something that is clearly wrong? I'll tell you, at our house, it was always, Hootie did it. I'm not sure who Hootie is, but Hootie did it. And Missy asked her about that the other day, and she said, well, I think that her grandmother came up with that when the kids would say, we didn't do it. Well, Hootie must have done it. But what else? What excuses have y'all heard where people try to say or try to pass blame or pass the buck to somebody else? The devil made me do it. Remember the cartoons where they used to have the little angel on one and the devil on the other, and they would try to make the cartoon character do something? What else? God wants me to be happy. That's a good one there. That's right. God won't hurt anybody. Yep. I mean, sometimes we'll just say, it wasn't me. Wasn't me. Or maybe, I don't know. I hear that a lot, especially in the workplace. I don't know. And so just kind of passing the buck there. Now, it appears to be part of human nature to deflect responsibility. And in other words, we always want to deflect blame from us to someone or someone else. And we can see this from the very beginning of creation when God confronted Adam and his sin in the Garden of Eden. Who has Genesis 3:12 and 13? Please read that.
The Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate."
All right, so what do we see there? We see Adam's reply, the woman who you put here with me. Who's he deflecting blame on? God. He's saying, God, you did this. That's right. So Adam kind of blamed Eve for what happened, but he was really blaming God for that, not blaming Satan. But Eve did blame Satan, didn't she? But really, Adam blamed God, and that seems to be the way it is today as well. We want to blame somebody else for everything. Now, God ultimately is God ultimately responsible for our temptations and sin? Well, of course not. But when we look at our text tonight, and that's from James, James is going to provide 4 strong proofs that God is not responsible for our temptations, nor is responsible for our weakness in giving in to sin. And James explains the nature of evil, the nature of man, the nature of lust, and the nature of God. And as you read this passage, be thankful that through Jesus Christ, God has provided a way for us to be delivered from our sinful nature. Now, here's tonight's passage, and we're going to kind of break this passage down so nobody has this to read. We're going to break this down and look at this verse by verse as we go through here. And so, first of all, there's 2 words I want to bring up here that we want to look at specifically. And the first one is the word sin. Sin is a transgression of God's will in thought, word, or deed. So a transgression of God's will in thought, word, and deed. And so we see it used twice, the word sin used twice in our reading tonight. But the word sin means that transgression. And when we were born physically, we inherited from Adam the flesh with its tendency towards sin. And the one word that best describes sin, the flesh, is our human nature. And that, you ever think about that? Sin being selfish. But the sin of Adam centered on setting his own will and interest against God's. And that has been in the center of sin ever since. And Jesus made it clear that man's basic problem is not with what is outside of him, but what is within him. Who's got Mark 7:22-23?
Deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside of the vile person.
Okay. Notice what Mark says there about sin. Comes out of a person is what defiles them, for it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. So the first word is sin, and then the next word is temptation. And temptation means of trying, testing, assaying, or proving. And the Greek word, and this is the noun form of the word translated tempted, has the basic meaning of trying, testing, or proving, and can be negative or positive, depending on the context. And in James 1 verse 12, the word is used in the same for trials or testing, but in our text tonight, the idea is clearly that of temptation, of solicitation to evil. So here James deals with an entirely different concept, and the difference being it is not in the test itself, but it is in the person's response to it. If a believer responds in faithfulness, obedience to God's word, he successfully endures a trial. If he succumbs to it in the flesh, doubting God and disobeying, he is tempted to sin. Now, the right response leads to spiritual endurance, righteousness, wisdom, and other blessings. And the wrong response leads to sin and death. All right, so let's look at James chapter 1, verses 13-18. And here it starts off and it says, when tempted. So tempted, now that's the same Greek word translated trials and is translated tempted here. Then it says, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil. Here James uses the phrase, God is tempting me. Anybody ever used that phrase before? I heard other people use that phrase before. You haven't? Okay. Well, now God, by his holy nature, has no capacity for evil, right? We understand that. So we shouldn't say that God is tempting me. And if we continue in verse 13, it says, nor does he tempt anyone. Now, God allows trials to occur, and in that temptation happens, But God has promised not to allow more than believers can endure, and never without a way to escape. And that's according to 1 Corinthians 10:13, which says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted before your ability. But with the temptation, we will always provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. Somebody may have had that, and I just read it for you. So,
Thank you.
well, God was testing me. Okay. But here, when it's talking about no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man, God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. Now, believers must choose whether to take the escape God provides or to give into it. In James chapter 1, verse 14, so the continuing there says, but each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Now, the phrase dragged away, this Greek word was used to describe wild game being lured into traps. Just as an animal can be drawn to their death by attractive baits, temptation promises people something good, but can be actually harmful. And then it says own evil desires, and that refers to lust, the strong desire of the soul to enjoy or acquire something to fulfill the flesh. Man's fallen nature has the propensity to strongly desire whatever sin will satisfy it. So we've got dragged away, own evil desires, and then the next word is their own. So that describes the individual nature of lust that is different for each person as a result of inheriting tendencies, environment, upbringing, or personal choices. You know, if you put a chocolate bar out here, I'm not going to be tempted by that because I don't like chocolate. But who else can, anybody else? I see some people looking saying they want their chocolate. Now they want a chocolate bar. Paul, can you run down to DG and grab a few chocolate bars for me? But that's what it's talking about, their own. So it's different for everybody. And then the next word it talks about there says enticed. And that's a fishing term that means to capture, to catch with bait. And it is it's a parallel to dragged away. Okay. So here we're looking at dragged away, own evil desires, their own, and enticed. And then verse 15 says, then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. Now there he's talking about giving birth to sin, and then he's talking about it becoming full grown. And so that kind of has to happen over time, doesn't it? And I mean, we're not born full grown. But notice the phrases there. It says has conceived, gives birth, and gives birth to death. Sin is not merely a spontaneous act, but the result of a process. So have you ever thought of it that way? So in other words, you know, things can start with just little pieces. And, you know, they just something little. And you go, okay, we'll just let that go. We used to tell our kids when they were little, no, you're not going to do that. Well, why not? Why can't we do that? Everybody else is doing it. Why can't we? Anybody ever heard any of that? But you let little things in. Now, is that true in the church too? Can be. People let little things into the church. The next thing you know, you're off the deep end. But sin is not merely a spontaneous act, but it's that result of a process. And the Greek word for has conceived and gives birth is similar to the process of physical conception and birth. Now, James, when he looks at this, he's really personalizing temptation and shows that it can follow a similar sequence. Now, James, when he personalizes that, he's talking about sin with all of its deadly results. And while sin in itself does not result in physical death for the believer, it can lead to a physical death. We understand that, don't we? But James is really talking about a spiritual death. Then look at verse 16. It says, don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. So when it talks about don't be deceived, the Greek expression refers to erring, not going astray, or wandering. Christians are not to make the mistakes of blaming God rather than themselves for their sin. Okay? Don't be deceived. Verse 17. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Now, it's talking there, it says every good and perfect gift is from above. And the King James says every good gift and every perfect gift. So in the NIV, it says good and perfect, but in the New King James, it says every good and every perfect gift. And here we have two different words that are used for gift, and that is to emphasize the perfection and inclusiveness of God's graciousness. And the first denotes the act of giving, and the second is the object given. Does that make sense? So we're talking about every good and perfect gift. One way is you're receiving a gift, and the other one is actually the gift itself. So everything related to divine giving is adequate, complete, and beneficial. And then he talks about the Father of the heavenly lights. And an ancient Jewish expression for God is the creator, with lights referring to the sun, moon, and stars. We understand that. And then next it talks about who does not change like shifting sands. Now, have you ever been to a desert before and you even walked on a beach? What happens to the sand if you walk on a beach? Water comes up, rolls over, and you can't tell that you walked there before, right? Same would be true if you were in a desert, because the wind would blow and carry away. Anybody ever seen any trails out in the middle of the desert? Usually they get blown away, don't they? And so we don't see those. But what it's talking about here is God doesn't change like that. God is the same, so he does not change. Verse 18. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. Now, there he talks about a couple of interesting things. First, he talks about he chose, and the phrase translates a Greek word that makes the point that regeneration is not just a wish, but an active expression of God's will, which he always has the power to accomplish. The phrase occurs at the beginning of the Greek sentence, which means James intends to emphasize that the sovereign will of God is the source of his new life. So he's talking about he chose. And it says gives us birth, divine act of regeneration. And then it talks about giving that birth through the word of truth. So Scripture, the word of God, he regenerates sinners through the power of that word. We've talked about in Paul's class on Wednesday nights, talks about the word, talks about the Holy Spirit bringing the word, speaking through the word. Same thing here, talking about the word. And then first fruits, originally an Old Testament expression referring to the first and best harvest crops, which God expects as an offering. And an example of that is Exodus 23:19. Does somebody have that? So what's he talking about there? Talk about bringing the best, the first fruits of your soil to the Lord of your God. And we always have been taught to bring the first, right? Not the last. And so even when we talk about giving in our contribution, it's bring the first, not the last. And so then in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 1 through 19, there's a whole passage that talks about first fruit and tithing. And it talks about what giving to God that initial crop was an act of faith, that he would fulfill his promises of a full harvest to come. And in the same way, Christians are the first evidence of God's new creation that is to come, and they presently enjoy in their new life of a foretaste of future glory. So when you talk about first fruits, we have a promise there. So bring first fruits. Okay, look at your second question. What do you learn about God's nature in this passage? I wrote down at least three. The first one that I wrote down was in verse 13, where it says that, what about God? He expects you to obey him. It also says there that God can't be tempted, right? What else does it tell you in this passage about God's nature? That he'll never tempt you? Yep. What else? Verse 15, he's talking about sin bringing about death. And he's talking about a spiritual death there. So being away from God is going to bring about that death. So part of God's nature there would be that we need to be with God and that he's not going to tolerate sin. Then look, what about verse 17? What does that say about gifts? Every good gift comes from God. So when we look at God's nature, we see that he can't be tempted. We see that he doesn't tolerate sin. Every good gift is going to come from God. But what does that tell us about God? Remember, y'all have to answer questions and speak during time. When we say God is good, don't we? And God's going to do what's right. And can God forgive me? Absolutely. Can God condemn me? Absolutely. But there's a nature that God has, and we need to realize what that is. Look at number 3. Describe the progress from temptation to sin. How is that different? How does temptation lead from really nothing to full-blown sin? You give into it? Well, I mean, really, when there's a temptation there, don't we have to make a decision about that temptation? You know, like we talked about a minute ago, we'll use the chocolate bar. That's not going to affect me at all, but others it might. It's not to me. Right. But temptation really is external, isn't it? And sin would be internal, wouldn't it? We have to make the decision to sin as part of that as well. So we can have temptations all around us in many different forms, in many different ways, but we don't have to give into them. But once we do, it becomes an internal thing. And so that's really the progress as you move from temptation to sin, is that temptation is external, it's outside of you, and then it can lead and become an internal thing once it becomes sin. All right, so now James warns the believers not to be deceived. So look at number 4. In what ways can we be deceived when it comes to temptation? You ordered something from Amazon and you weren't really happy? Like we saw the smiley face on that? Yeah? No? Maybe? You can believe what you hear? Yeah? Now I have to tell a story on Missy because this is hilarious. So she ordered a blouse from Amazon, and it was not sold by Amazon. And it came in yesterday. It did not look like what was on Amazon. I asked her, I said, well, did you look at who sold it? She said, no. And it was not Amazon. I said, did you check out the star rating on it? She said, no. I said, how many stars did it give? She said, it didn't get 4. And I said, okay. She said, it did get 3. I said, okay. She said, it didn't get 2. And so now we have a blouse that doesn't look like what was on the website. So, you know, when you think about being deceived, that's a big way to deceive. I did read an article earlier it was late last week actually, and it was talking about people who got ripped off on Amazon. And they had somebody that bought a TV and it was less than $100. So they thought, what a deal I'm getting. And the TV showed up and it was about this big. So it was the toy TV. It did come with a remote though, so at least you had that going for you. But there's a bunch of them that were like that were just like crazy. I mean, like that people bought, but you can be deceived in those ways. But what other ways? What about peer pressure? Peer pressure can deceive you into doing things, can it? Everyone's doing it. Talked about that just a minute ago. My mom would always say, everybody was jumping off the bridge, would you too? And I said, absolutely. Just kidding. Everyone's doing it. No one will ever know. We brought that up a minute ago as well. So, you know, when you talk about being deceived when it comes to temptation, there's lots of different ways that things can tempt you. And it doesn't have to be somebody. It can be something as well. But they can tempt you into doing it. Well, I mean, I think that, you can be deceived by other things. So like something you bought on Amazon, they can deceive you in doing that. Do y'all remember when, y'all may not remember this, but Nintendo came out with these little classic video games? Do you remember those? And they came out with the NES Classic, which was a little bitty, came with 30 preloaded games, and people were selling those on eBay, just the box. Deceive people, right? So you might be deceived that way. What about sin? How does sin deceive you differently than things like that? Or do they? All right. Yeah, absolutely.
But you can convince yourself that something will turn out good when you know better.
Yeah. And we do that with sin too. Yeah.
Deception is on their part. Deception is to present something that looks good, but in reality it's not.
Mhm.
Then we agree, in essence, that it looks good. And so then we bite into it, so to speak. So the deception is on their part. It's there. It's real. It's what Satan does to us in our temptation.
Exactly.
So it really the temptation, that's this temptation almost by definition. The temptation. Almost deceived by its nature. So it promises something that, is not true.
Yeah. And that would be true with things as well as people as well as sin. It would all fall in that same boat. So they can be deceptive. It can look good, but not be. But there are different things, and like we talked about earlier, that can kind of help that out too. So the way that you were brought up may be different than others. They used to make, they don't make as much fun on TV as they used to, but they used to, you would watch any comedy series. It seems like the dad was just oaf. Yeah, he was a goof or something like that. Was always getting in trouble about something and always doing what was not, they weren't supposed to do. And there was always something tempting that happened that they got messed up in. And so the same kind of thought there too as well. Look at the next question. What does James mean when he says that in God there is what does not change like shifting sands? Almost doesn't make sense. Did I read that right? Yeah. Start that off. Have to answer it like a question. What does James mean when he says that in God there is who does not change like shifting? So really God does not change like shifting sands is what the point there. What does that really mean? I mean, outside of God doesn't change, what else does that mean? Consistent? Yeah. Same today, tomorrow, next day? Yeah. So when you look at who does not change like shifting sands, we talked a little bit about that as well. And just think of those shifting sands, whether that be on the beach or not, in the desert, it doesn't change at all. Now, some translations say no variation or shadow of turning. We have a song that says that, right? No variation or shadow of turning. So what does that mean? Does that mean the same thing as the shifting sands? Or does that mean something a little different? No variation means the same, or shadow of turning. Okay. What was that? Like these? Yeah. All right, so let's go over and read. I broke this up, Romans 7, 8 through 25. So somebody has 8 through 13. Somebody's got 14 through 20, and somebody has 21 through 25. So whoever's got 8 through 13, would you read, please?
And the commandment came, sin sprang to life. Found that the very commandment that was intended to bring life actually brought death. Sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. So then, the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, righteous, good.
Okay, who's got the next one there?
You what is good to bring about my death. So through the commandment, sin might become utterly sinful. We know that the law is spiritual, and I am unspiritual. So is a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do. What I want to do, I do not do. What I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know what good itself does not dwell in me, that is my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it.
Okay, he's got the next 21 through 25.
Well, I find this law do good. He was right there with me. For in my inner being, I delight in God's law. But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man am I! Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature, a slave to the law of sin.
All right, so we've got that. Do not do what I do, because I do what I do not do. That's this passage. Look at number 6 on your list there. So it's talking about Romans 7:8 through 25. It says, what are the main points that Paul makes about the internal struggle all Christians have between enticement to evil and desire for God-honoring righteous living? And one of the things he talks about, he mentions it twice in verse 8 and verse 11. He talks about what? I have to look that up. Verse 8, he says, but sin seizing the opportunity. And then he talks again in verse 11, but sin seizing the opportunity. So he uses that twice. How can sin seize an opportunity? Think about that. Catches you in a weak moment. Yeah, that absolutely can happen. Okay.
Like the death, like Eve, right?
Yep. That's right.
Like it's out there just looking for an opportunity.
Yeah, looking for an opportunity. Exactly. Look at verse 13. What does it say there? Did that which is good, then because death became death to me. So did that which is good, then became death to me. By no means, nevertheless, in order that sin might be recognized as sin, to bring about death, so that through the commandment sin might become utterly sinful. So what does it mean there when he talks about it used what is good to bring about death? How does sin do that? How does sin use what is good? Well, you can't be strong enough to stand up to it, but I think that's kind of talking about that it doesn't necessarily have to be everything that's bad could lead to sin. That is really anything could lead to sin. So it all depends on how you're going to handle that. But look at verse 15. He talks about, I do not understand why I do. How does Paul, who wrote so many books of the Bible, who seemed to know everything there is to know about God and Christ and what's good and what's not, how does he say, I do not understand what I do? Does that mean that we all have a chance because Paul couldn't do it and therefore we can't do it either? Yep.
They were still there, even in his knowledge and close as he was to Christ, those things still came.
Exactly. And look at verse 18, that talks about good itself does not dwell in me. So Paul goes another step further. And then he goes down also in verse 18 and says, my sinful nature. And look how he ends verse 24, says, wretched man am I. So he's got some stuff that he says there about himself when he talks about, sin taking the opportunity, doing what is good. I don't understand what I do. Good itself does not dwell in me, my sinful nature and wretched man that I am. So he goes on and on about these things. And so part of that might humanize Paul a little bit as well, to let you know he wasn't perfect, and we're not either. But I think you're exactly right. He wanted to be, and he strived to be. But these things he still had to deal with. And I think that's true with us too. Mhm. Yeah.
Think something bad and then go to somebody or do something, you know it's wrong, but you really start to realize that like your inner nature comes out, you get mad. Somebody says something dramatic, read something into something, I don't know, I catch myself.
Yeah.
Doing that, and I do it, I think more, the older I get, the more I realize I do it right. When you're younger, you're like, man, it's perfect. The older you get, the more you realize how imperfect you are. And
Right.
decisions you make are not right. Much as you think they are when you're living. So maybe Paul is like, this is a maturity thing. You start to look inside yourself and go, wow, I'm not as good as I thought I was.
All right. So real quick, move a little quick here. How is sin defined in this Romans 7 passage? He talks at least four things. One of them's in verse 8. He talks about evil desires. He also talks about it being deceitful. In verse 11, he says deceives. Verse 13 uses the word death. And then he comes at in verse 17, he talks about that it lives in me. So when he talks about sin and how he would define that, it's evil desires, it deceives, it brings about death, but it lives in me is the way that it's put here in Romans. Who has Ephesians 2, 5 through 6? All right, and then number 8 says, what has God done in the life of each believer that gives them no excuse to sin? If you look at that passage in Ephesians 2, 5 through 6, it says he made us alive with who? Christ. And then he says later in that, he talks about it is by dead in transgressions. And the next is it's by grace you have been saved. And then he talks lastly there, he talks about, and God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus. So God has done in the life of each believer, as he made us alive in Christ. By grace he has been saved and seated with Christ. All right, who has Ephesians 4:24? All right, now the story goes, this is one of Paul's stories, maybe. How do you always say there's a story that goes? Okay. There's a story that goes that the Roman Emperor Augustine, who was converted to Christianity, a woman who had formerly lived with, was calling to him as he walked down the street, but he did not answer. She persisted and finally ran up to him and said, Augustine, it is I. To which he replied, I know, but it's no longer I. So that's what Christ can do with you. He can change you from being a sinner into being a Christian. All right, look at number 9. How much are you tempted to blame other people or circumstances for your own sin? What have you learned in this lesson about that tendency? So when you think about sin, now not everybody's always going to know everything, which we talked briefly about earlier. So not everybody's going to know. So maybe it's not every time you try to blame other people. But there is sin in the world, but through Christ we can defeat it. So think about that on your own, about blaming other people for circumstances. I used to work with a lady that it didn't matter what it was, she didn't do it. And she, the short story is she kept stealing somebody's lunch out of the refrigerator. And I didn't do it. It wasn't me until one day we caught her eating it. So, but sometimes you have to get caught before you do that. All right, who's got 2 Corinthians 5:17? All right, so if we could just remember in each moment that the old you is dead and the life that God has given you, that new nature is alive. Look at number 10. How would it change your life today, specifically and practically, if you were to do that? If you were going to remember that Christ has created a new creature in you, does that give you hope? Does that help you to think about, well, I need to act upon this, that God has given me something? I need to act upon it. It's not just something that happens one time. You got to continually do that. All right, so kind of to finish up here, in this world, you can look at marketing tries to deceive you. You go to the grocery store, food tries to deceive you. Why do they have all those things up front, the candy bars and stuff? Last minute, I'll just grab one of those and go. Politics tries to deceive you. People want you to sin. God is the only truth. So think about it that way. But the point is this: temptations are all around us. They can be hidden in plain sight or obscured, or they can be something else. But we need to keep them behind us and keep moving forward to become more Christ-like each day. Thoughts, comments, questions, complaints? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We can make him feel bad. We can be discouraging to them because I can't do that.
Right.
I don't think there's anybody here or in Nazareth that should give the impression they don't have problems.
Yep. All right. Anything else anybody wants to bring up? Hopefully some of these have gotten you to think about those, especially when we have this time of the year where there's all kinds of things out there that are just trying to tempt you, not necessarily always a sinful thing, but we need to be aware of those things and do our best to be more Christ-like every day. Anything else? Mm-hmm. Well, we talked earlier about how things that, the little things can sneak in and they can lead to bigger things. And so I think there's things out there that can start off not necessarily being a sinful act that end up leading that direction. And that could be anything from, could be anything. Anything can lead down that path. All right, well, let's bow in prayer real quick. Father in heaven, thank you for this day and allowing us to come together tonight and learn more about your word. Pray that you'll just help us as we did our study tonight to help us take it to heart and be able to put temptations behind us, even though we know we're not perfect, but we can put them behind us and try to be more Christ-like every day. Help us to do your will in everything that we do and just to be your people, and help us to shine your light as we go out into our communities and help others to know that we're yours by the way that we love one another. And even though we're not perfect, we are here wanting to learn more about you. Help us to do that and help us to live the kind of life that allow us to live with you in heaven forever one day. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank y'all.